Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have tons of stuff to get through in today's video. I'd like to start things out, though, with the Radeon Instinct MI100, which is based on AMD's CDNA architecture. You may also know this particular range of GPUs as Artcurus, which is basically kind of a spiritual successor to their Vega architecture, albeit with lots of tweaks. But a benchmark, and actually a lot of information for this particular GPU, the Radeon Instinct MI100, is actually leaked thanks to Jim over at AdoredTV and his website. I'll link it, of course, in the video description. And the gist is that the Radeon Instinct MI100 is likely going to be aiming at the FP32 market, which is for a plethora of different things such as HPC and ML, but also very lucrative markets such as oil and gas. And Nvidia do definitely have still wins. For example, this is according to the slides, which Jim is fairly certain of the legitimacy. So according to AMD's own slides, Nvidia do still have the edge in several arenas. So for example, we will still have FP64 being better on Nvidia's Ampere architecture, and also with mixed precision operations which can be run on Nvidia's Tensor cores, that too will be a better suit, or better fit I suppose, for Nvidia's Ampere architecture. Allegedly, the plan is that AMD want to market these particular GPUs in terms of, well, basically performance per dollar. And according to these benchmarks, the Instinct MI100, I'm just going to refer to it as the Instinct or Radeon for the rest of this video, has just over 10%, around 13% better FP32 performance, which of course is full precision compared to Ampere. And it also spanks Volta, the V100, by about twice the performance, which is, as you would agree, pretty damn impressive. This particular GPU will also be available in a much larger ecosystem, and AMD will be rolling out both 1U and 3U servers, which will feature this. The 3U will have a dual socket Rome/Milan processor, and it won't launch until March 2021, and will be configured with up to 8 Radeon Instinct MI100s, and once again 2 EPYC processors, which is, as you would imagine, a lot of performance. We're looking at 272 teraflops of FP32 performance, as well as 512 gigabytes per second PCIe bandwidth, which also is combined with 9.8 terabytes per second of memory bandwidth thanks to the HBM2, and on top of that 256 gigabytes of RAM. And as you would imagine, this has a fairly hefty power draw of 3 kilowatts, which, yeah. And then the lower end, if you can consider one of these a lower end, we are looking at a dual socket configuration. This is with the 1U and 4 MI100s, and this is combined with a paltry, pitiful, measly 136 teraflops of performance. I will be interested to see how AMD does in high-performance computing with GPUs. Obviously, Nvidia will be facing competition not only from AMD, but also Intel, assuming we actually see Xe Ponte Vecchio actually launch and be competitive. Hopefully it is, because I think that's good for us if it is. And it's going to be curious how the ecosystem changes, especially not just because of the hardware, but also the fact that Nvidia have had such a grip on the market in terms of the software as well, with things, of course, like CUDA. There is definitely an open source movement which is building for this, so I will be extremely interested to see how the market changes over the next several years. Of course, we will need to wait and see whether these slides are legitimate. I spoke to Jim and he is fairly confident in the legitimacy of this information, but as always, because I can't verify this myself, because these are not my sources, do take it with a grain of salt. And a very small thing for Intel, this is not exactly a massive leak in terms of CPU architecture, but we actually have new branding for Intel's upcoming processors, which is actually quite a big switch. And this was spotted by Momomo originally on Twitter, so credit to him. I'll of course link his Twitter in the description of the video. And there are a couple of different designs. We have Intel, Intel Inside, Intel Core, and then finally Intel Evo. The most logical thing for Evo possibly is the big small architecture, which of course will be part of Intel's later processors such as Alder Lake, but Alder Lake doesn't launch until at least the second half of next year. As a quick reminder, well, it's still based on an 8-core CPU in terms of the big cores, but there's also 8 little cores as well, which are going to be introduced for the desktop. Honestly, I have no idea how this will function for a desktop processor. It doesn't really help that we don't fully understand yet what those cores will be able to accomplish, and also how work will be spread. So once again, let's assume that you are trying to, I don't know, let's say you're running Cinebench, just for the sake of argument. That's a nice easy workload. Will Cinebench be able to utilize all 8 cores, 16 threads of just the big cores, or will it also be able to spread work onto the smaller cores as well, which would obviously mean you have 16 cores, 32 threads available, or will it also depend upon the work of a specific workload? No one knows. As well as what about latency and all of this other stuff. I will be curious about this one, not just because of the performance, but I'm just genuinely interested to see what Intel actually have planned for the desktop. I'm not opposed to it necessarily. I know some people are like, no, I don't want a big / little configuration. I don't really care about it in principle. I just am more concerned about the performance and how it's going to scale. And presumably at this point as well, AMD will not just be sitting on its thumbs and just saying la 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 to the world. Recently I discussed that Zen 3 has a really nice IPC bump. I originally had leaked that the combined IPC of the CPU on average is around 15 to 17%, but recently I've also pointed out that one of my sources told me it's at least 15% for integer, but it could be up to 20%. However, in the same video I also leaked that Warhol, which is an alleged refresh of Zen 3, is actually legitimate and real. So if that's true, the question is, what exactly are AMD doing with that refresh? Is it just going to be similar to what we've seen with Matisse, with higher clock frequencies for the XT parts, or are there going to be fundamental changes to the architecture, albeit not necessarily profound ones, but I guess the easiest and most logical example would be Zen to Zen Plus, which has some slight tweaks, for example, to the caches of the processor, and also, naturally as well, a slightly refined process, which enables the CPU to, once again, run at higher clocks. Question: what does SLI and the PlayStation 5 have in common? Well, apparently quite a bit, according to a patent, which has actually popped onto the internets. This was filed back in January of 2019, but the publication date is, well, today. Well, actually I just realised you may be watching this in 6 months' time, so it's July 30th, 2020. Thank you to everyone who DM'd me this or sent me an email about it, it's highly appreciated. This is actually a fairly lengthy patent, and honestly this is also rather technical, so I will go over it fairly briefly in this video, and maybe if enough of you ask I'll go into it more in depth, I suppose, in another video. The thing is, it's very ambiguous what this could be used for in terms of Sony's future plans. but I'll read the synopsis, or I suppose abstract is the best way of putting it. In a multi-GPU simulation environment, frame buffer management may be implemented by multiple GPUs rendering respective frames of video, or by rendering respective portions of a frame of video. One of the GPUs control HDMI output by virtue of receiving frame information from the other GPUs, reading the complete frames through physically connected HDMI port, or the GPUs can be multiplexed together. And if you take a gander at the title, it says it's Scalable Game Console CPU and GPU Design for Home and Cloud Gaming. So obviously there are, well, two usages there. Theoretically, this could be for a PS5 Pro, and for those asking, I will be discussing the potential for a Pro system in the not too distant future, but it could also be used for the cloud as well. And honestly, this particular design is extremely interesting, because it does indeed provide quite an in-depth explanation of how Sony would go about this. Now, as you are possibly aware, games consoles typically are created on APUs, which is basically a single chip which contains CPUs, GPUs, memory controllers, and goodness knows what else. In the PS5, for example, it also contains other things like the decompression block for, of course, the SSD. It also contains the sound block as well, and all of this is naturally on the same die. What this seems to imply is that you can basically, I suppose the best way of describing this is have almost like a chiplet architecture. So if you're familiar with the Zen philosophy, and I don't mean a way of thinking / philosophy / spirituality, instead I am referring to the processors from AMD with the Zen 2 architecture, and later they come in chiplets. Basically, if you purchase a 3700X, you have a single chiplet which contains 8 processor cores, and this is also combined with an I/O die. If, on the other hand, you purchase, let's say, a 3950X from the company, things are a little different. You have 2 chiplets and, once again, an I/O die. And this can scale up to 64 cores for the higher-end processors like with Threadripper or the higher-end Epics. This is kind of similar in that principle. Essentially, what Sony appear to be stating here is because when you build larger chips, yields become more problematic, they are basically stating that you could have a single SoC, which would be for a lower-end version of the console, and then if you wanted to build a more powerful version of the console, you could basically combine several of them together. So this technically could be for the PS5 Pro, but it is also possible it would be for a future console, I guess the PlayStation 6, or it's also possible it's not for home usage at all, and it is simply for the purpose of cloud. There are a couple of methods which have been described of how this functions. For example, in one of them, you basically have one GPU rendering one portion of the screen, while another SoC's GPU would essentially do the same to another portion of the screen, basically splitting the work. Or one GPU is working on one frame while another GPU is working on a different frame. These methods have also been similar to what we've seen with desktop GPUs as well. As I said a few minutes ago, this is a pretty extensive topic, so maybe when things calm down a little bit, because obviously there's so much console news, I will discuss this more in depth. Oh, and while I think of it, a number of you were also asking me about the Xbox and machine learning. I am actually waiting for the Hot Chips conference there because I suspect Microsoft will reveal a lot more information officially. If they don't, I will go over what I already know. However, I suspect because the Hot Chips conference is not exactly that far into the future, I would rather just speak and create a video with a lot more confidence, with a lot more sources. But if they don't, I will go with what I know. Hey you, are you interested in buying a new Nvidia graphics card? Well, you may not be at this point, but after you hear what I'm about to say, you may change your bloody mind, because according to some leaks and rumours that are floating around, Nvidia's next generation of cards may have a monstrous, and I can't put it any other way, monstrous performance increase compared to what we already have with Turing. The RTX 3090 is rumoured to have a 50% performance increase in Time Spy Extreme, which would just be gargantuan. It would be absolutely monumental for that. I will quickly point out that these are rumours, A, and B, it's worth noting, of course, that, well, being completely blunt, Time Spy Extreme is not necessarily indicative to every game ever. However, we also have Rogame and a couple of other people who have chimed in and stated that this is true, as well as Kopati7 Kimi as well. Kopati7 has also said that Time Spy Extreme is over 9,000. I'm sorry, I had to say that. He said it's almost 10,000, but I wanted to do the Vegeta meme. Just let me have it. Just let me have it. And according to Rogame, the performance metrics of this next generation Ampere GPU is going to be pretty much stomping the RTX 2080 Ti Founders Edition, although the unknown GPU he has here is older. So I suspect that Nvidia's architecture, just to be clear, the results he has here is an early engineering sample with Rogame, where he says it's about 131% over the RTX 2080 Ti, which was the 100% mark. So, according to Kitty and Kopati, Nvidia are targeting a pretty gargantuan 50% improvement in performance. That is nothing to be sniffed at. That is absolutely humongous in terms of performance. And I'm going to finish this video off with a pretty amusing, well, I can't put it any other way, email that I received. And this is allegedly RTX Titan performance and specifications. And I received this anonymously. I won't give a screenshot of the individual's name or anything like that, even though it was sent anonymously. But I'm almost 100% positive that all of this is fake, and which is normal. I receive fake stuff all the time, but just because of some of the weirdness of this, I decided to throw it into the video for fun. And if in the incredibly unlikely event it turns out to be true, great, but I'm going to say that this is 99% fake. However, I'm going to put it in here anyway, because maybe this will be sent to someone else if I don't cover it, and then obviously they might run with it being true, which is not unlikely. So I'm just going to throw it in here, and, you know, we can pick fault with several things. This is a limited Halo card using a small portion of TSMC's allocation with Nvidia. This is what the email says. Retains the look and sold as a prosumer card, and because it will create buzz. Drivers to ensure it can game well. High cost, low volume part. Honestly, that makes sense. Paves way for the RTX 3090 Ti. This is allegedly going to be in 2021 on the 7nm refresh. And it's released only if AMD can challenge the 3080 Ti. Bear in mind, we've only at the moment seen this GPU referred to as the 3090, and then we have the image. There are several things which I find wrong with this. I'm not going to mention all of them. As I said, in the comments, I want you to point out a couple of the things that are kind of iffy about specifications. The first one that I'd like to bring your attention to is the number of tensor cores. So it's 864 tensor cores that they are stating here. According to what we know about Ampere officially from Nvidia, it has 4, I'm going to repeat that, 4 tensor cores per SM. So all you have to do is take 6144, divide it by 64, then times that by 4. Yeah, that is not 864 tensor cores. So that's wrong. And also the same thing could be said with the RT cores. It basically comes down to 3 RT cores per SM, which would be a massive increase over what we see with Turing, which only has 1 RT core per SM. Theoretically, I suppose it's not impossible that with the consumer version, Nvidia would have increased it, but they've gone to 3 RT cores per SM. Very doubtful. Very doubtful. There are a couple of other things as well which I find a bit iffy. For example, the actual render itself doesn't look exactly something Nvidia would put out, to be honest. And of course it does look very much like the leaked cooler that we saw recently. But with all of that said, thank you very much for watching the video, the normal stuff. If you enjoyed it, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.